proposed fraternity prank. Also, the Pope decided today to release Vatican-related bath products. An incredible thing. Yes, it's the new Pope on the rope. It's right, Pope on a rope. Wash with it, go straight to heaven.
Hello,
Thank
everyone.
you.
My name is Dr. Bill Roach. This is another episode of Timeless Dialogues, and I wish that we had some light-hearted, fun, comical things that we could talk about, but unfortunately, we have been given an odd Christmas present this year. Namely, we have to discuss, of all the things that we would have to discuss, of all the things that you might have to hear about on this channel on this day, we have to discuss the lopping off of the head, the cutting off of the head of the Satanic monument in the Iowa State House. And I say that because, you know, we tend to think of Christmas as a time in which we have some kind of normalcy in our culture. But it seems like for the last several years, it has been nothing but chaos. And, you know, we've always heard of things, you know, you've got the war on Christmas and you've got the war on this and the war on that. But it seems like things just keep getting crazier as the years go by. And this story is really just a classic example of that. And people have tried to, on both sides of the debate, I will say, both sides, from the left or the progressive left in this sense, or the right, and what they're trying to do with this, they have utterly just turned this into just a pure circus act all over the internet. And it's ranged from people who are saying, no, Christians need to storm into buildings and lop the head off of monuments. And if you don't believe that we should do that, then you're pro-Satan. And you think to yourself, man, I've been called a lot of things in my life, but I have never been called pro-Satan because I don't take the view of some person who thinks that I should run in and, you know, create chaos within our state capitol building and destruction to somebody's property within that particular state building. And on the other end of it, you've got, you know, people that are running these satanic societies in the state of Iowa. Now, I feel like I have something to say about this. I hail from the great state of Iowa. I am a person who was, you know, born and bred in the wonderful Hawkeye state. I have seen the Hawkeye cockeye for years on end. And I just recognize that at this time of year, leading up to the Hawkeye cockeye, they always try to do something crazy. Why? Because they need to get all of the attention upon how goofy and crazy politics are within the wonderful state of Iowa. I've seen it my entire life, and this is nothing less than that. But what I want to do today is I want to discuss this whole issue of how should people, in particular Christians, look at the issue of lopping the head off of a monument, a satanic monument within the Iowa State House. Now, I know that there's a lot of debate on this. You have people that say, you know, this is an issue of religious liberty and that in today's world, we shouldn't, you know, restrict this religious liberty within the lives of any person. And then you have other people that say, well, there is no religious liberty for something as evil and malevolent as Satan himself. And I see where both sides are going on this. Now, I tend to side with the idea of if you proverbially give a mouse a cookie, he's going to want much, much more after that. And once you start restricting religious liberties, namely religious liberties upon people, even if you disagree with the religion, then not only can that be weaponized, but that could one day be weaponized against you. And I know that there's a lot of people that are going to balk and scoff at that. But the reality is that we make these types of legislations and we make our Bill of Rights and we make our different amendments within a history of a long conversation on these matters. These things aren't done in a vacuum. Now, I'm not saying that I want satanic icons. You know, I'm not out there saying I want monuments of Satan within our state house, rah, rah, rah. And, you know, you're going to see the false rhetoric of so many of these people. And if you listen to them, the rhetoric is nothing more than that. You know, you're either for Jesus Christ lopping the head of, you know, satanic monuments off, or you're pro-Satan worship. And I go, no, there's more than that false bifurcation. I can think of laws and ways of dealing with this within the proper channels of the American government that don't require me to destruct somebody else's property that's within there. Now, I also realize that we don't just have absolute liberty on everything that we want to do. Obviously, we're not going to allow things that are doing moral harm upon people. We're not going to allow things that are going to be doing physical harm upon people in this regard. So we have to have some kind of balanced understanding of this that preserves our First Amendment rights and this idea of freedom of speech and freedom of religion that are just axiomatic to the United States of America. So with no further ado, I'm going to dive into this, and I'm going to look at this by setting a little bit of the context of the debate. So as we jump into this, I want to start out with this one tweet that started out here by Charlie Kirk. And many of you know Charlie Kirk. He's with Turning Point USA, and he's looking at this figure. This is Cassidy, the man who drove up from Mississippi all the way to the wonderful state of Iowa. And Charlie Kirk made this comment. He says, a Christian veteran just beheaded a monument to Satan in Iowa's state capitol. Okay. If you were to stop right there, I think you would just be reporting the news. But this is where the debate again starts to take place. He says this: if this is Christian nationalism, we need more of it. And the reality is that this is Christian nationalism. If you've studied anything about the history of what Christian nationalism has become, it's really this movement that wants to bring about the government enforcement of religion. Namely, they want to use political means to enforce what they deem as true religion. In this sense, it's this magisterial Protestant Reformation understanding of it. And they're willing, according to their own literature, to imprison, banish, or kill anybody that would differ with them on this. And they may squawk and balk at this, but I would just tell you to go listen to my lecture with Sovereign Nations on Christian nationalism, the danger and the draw, and an interview I did with Jenna Ellis on this matter. Now, one of the things that you're going to find here is that Jenna Ellis actually responds to this, and she says, I respectfully disagree. This is not the way. Quote, and then she goes on to say, Christianity teaches that we war not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual wickedness. The Satanic statue had no more actual power than an idol in Babylon. I hate that this was erected in anywhere, especially a state capital, but lawlessness in the name of Christian nationalism is completely missing the point of religious freedom and legitimacy of law. Destruction of property is not okay for the Christian who hates a satanic statue any more than it's okay for the Satanist who hates a nativity scene. So let's just think about the context of what she's getting at here. I actually agree with Jen on this. I think that Charlie is wrongly understanding the situation. In fact, I think Charlie is probably not really giving a true understanding of what Christian nationalism is. You know, I think that there's this play that takes place on the debate of Christian nationalism, and it sort of mirrors what's going on with the whole social justice movement. And let me give you an example of what I mean by this. So you're going to have people that are going to say things like this. So you believe in justice, right? Yeah. And then they're going to say, you believe in justice applied socially, right? Yeah, I think. Well, see, you believe in social justice. And anybody who's studied this issue realizes the manipulation that's taking place there. We realize that social justice was much more than this idea of that which ought to be done right to an individual before the law and done in such a way that applies to social activities or in a social fashion, that it was much more than that. It was actually something that could be seen as a Marxist revolution that was taking place within society. You know, there was a complete disregard for law. There was a complete disregard for property. That's why they saw people burning down buildings and cars and looting and all the rest, all under the guise of social justice. Because what's going on is it was the long march towards revolution. So they use virtuous things such as justice and love and equality and all the rest. But the only way that you get justice and love and equality and all the rest is through their means of justice, equality, and love and all the rest, namely through critical social justice, which is this idea that you must have critical theory undermining the way that you understand not only the issues, but also the solutions to the issues. And here's where this starts to play out. Christian nationalism plays a very similar game, and it works kind of like this. They're going to say things like this. You know, you don't like this globalist society, right? You don't want to have a world in which, you know, you're going to have people pouring over your borders and you're going to have different cultures ruining these good, legitimate moral frameworks that you have in society, right? So see, you're a nationalist, not a globalist, right? And then you start asking questions about what would actually provide the best form of nationalism. And people are going to say, you don't want secular nationalism because we know what secular nationalism has brought to us. It's given us the chaos of our day. And, we don't want Islamic nationalism because we know what they do in their countries. So what do you need? You don't need these other religions or these secular ideals. You need Christian nationalism, because it can provide the best grounding for morality and the best grounding for morality applied in society. So see, you're a Christian nationalist. But just like you believe in social justice doesn't mean you just believe in social justice. Christian nationalism isn't just this idea of you want to be a Christian that has this idea of national identity and security in that regard. And if you look at anything related to this debate, and I give a whole lecture on this with Sovereign Nations titled The Danger and Draw of Christian Nationalism, you'll find that it's a very authoritarian movement that is bringing what's known as integralism into this whole conversation, in which they want to integrate the church and the state, and they want to use the state to enforce church ideals. And in that sense, they do not believe in the freedom of religion nor in the freedom of speech. And that's exactly what we're trying to understand and see what's going on here. So as we pull this up, Jenna rightfully disagrees with that. We don't war against just lopping off the head of a monument. This statue has no real moral value. They were not forcing anybody to actually worship it. They weren't forcing people to bow down and proverbially kiss the ring or kiss the foot of this. And now I agree with her. We don't want this in the state capital. We don't want this really anywhere. But what she says here, lawlessness in the name of Christian nationalism is completely missing the point of religious freedom and legitimacy of law. And as much as we hate it, as much as these people balk at this, and as much as the people are going to twist my words here, freedom of religion is freedom for all religions. And that's not just me saying that. That's something that has been just axiomatic throughout so much of the American experiment, and even contemporary figures. People are going to point to somebody like a Francis Schaeffer. Schaeffer even argued for that because they recognize and they realize that if you start moving away from religious freedom, you're not only going to take the rights away from other people, but if they got into power, they're going to take the rights away from you. And that's why she's so right in what she's saying here, that the destruction of property is not the Christian way of going about this. Now, she goes on to say much more about this. And she was interviewed with Newsweek on this, and she says a few things about this. And I agree with what she's saying here. She says, "My opposition is to the ideology of Christian nationalism. Many people think I am a Christian, and I also believe in sovereign nations instead of globalism. So I'm a Christian nationalist." And we discussed that here. And she goes on to say, "But that's dangerously misunderstanding the anti-liberty ideology main Christian nationalist proponents advocate. They openly but purposefully vaguely advocate undermining the Constitution and rule of law, replacing it with a theocracy, including blasphemy laws and criminalizing other religions and their practice." And this comes from the mainstream literature of many of the top proponents of Christian nationalism. I mean, I'm thinking Andrew Torba. I'm thinking of a figure like Stephen Wolfe. I'm thinking of many of the figures that you're going to see promoting this whole movement. She goes on to say, "Our country was founded on a Judeo-Christian worldview, which recognizes the right of religious freedom. The state cannot and should not compel an individual to certain beliefs, nor restrain free exercise of religion. This necessarily includes all belief systems, even atheism, and the right to believe there is no God." And I would even argue that it goes to dealing with things like this monument that people may not like, but again, that's what it is there for. Namely, that's what the religious freedom aspects are. You may disagree with a person's religion. You may not like that person's religion. You may know that religion is absolutely, completely, utterly false, but it doesn't give you the right to take away their freedom of religion, their freedom of however they want to express themselves in that regard, nor does it give you the right to actually destroy their property. So then she goes on to say this. "The question is, who has the right to govern my conscience? World history has shown an enduring conflict between the state and the church. Our founders created a system whereby the state cannot infringe on an individual's right to freely exercise religion or compel religious practice, and also enforcing that right in civil law when an individual seeks to violate another individual's rights. She goes on to say, as a Christian, I hate the statue that was placed in the Iowa Capitol, as do I, as do all Christians in this regard. But I also recognize that in a well-ordered society, the state can and must punish individuals like Michael Cassidy or BLM rioters who destroy property of others, whether statues, storefronts, or other property. No person is justified in destruction of others' property to advance their ideology. Our nation is founded on liberty and justice, quote, for all, capital letters. She goes on to say, I am very concerned that well-meaning Christians do not see the dangers of Christian nationalism. We should be advocating for a well-ordered society that protects religious freedom and liberty for all. And then she goes on to talk about a podcast she did with me on that. And I would encourage you to go and listen to it. Now, there's several things that you notice that she looks at here. You know, she's interacting with people. We agree that civil disobedience is sometimes lawful, though not legal under government laws, you know, different things here. But here's the key thing that I want you to see. She gives an update because, you know, the real reason that she gave this post was because she was responding to TPUSA and Charlie Kirk on this matter. And I think she's right in what she says here. So note what they say in this article here. This is from Turning Point USA. They say, we understand that some might disagree on how we can best eliminate the ludicrous reality that Satan is celebrated in our public places, but nearly all conservatives agree, including Miss Ellis, that it must be confronted, a TPUSA spokesman told Newsweek. We would agree at that point, but they go on to say this. We celebrate this patriot making a public spectacle and demonstration expressing the outrage shared by millions, and we support attacking such an abomination with lawfare in the courts as well. So look at what they're saying here. Notice what she says here. She rightly says this. Notably, this statement, it does not address criminal conduct and vandalism, but rather characterizes destruction of property as a public spectacle and demonstration expressing the outrage shared by millions that we should celebrate. That's literally the defense BLM used for riots and destruction of property. She goes on to say an actual and legal public demonstration would be how Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds responded to the satanic display, participating in prayer in the Capitol building. I do agree that the display must be confronted, but not through celebrating vandalism. And I would actually go on to say, this man is not doing a patriotic thing at this regard. He's doing an unlawful thing in that regard. And it's not that they were forcing this man to go and worship this monument. They weren't forcing anybody to go and celebrate this monument. In fact, I think if you want the absolute honest truth, yeah, you got people that buy into this, but I think a lot of these people were probably just trying to see how they could get people to react to the situation. In fact, growing up in Iowa and knowing people that have participated in things like this, I know there's an element of, all right, guys, let's see how many of these crazy Christians we can utterly tick off with this and sit back and laugh. And you ask yourself, why would they do that in such a way? Well, just think about it. Isn't that so much of the playbook of the progressive left in this world today? You know, the real action is your reaction. They wanted you guys to do this kind of stuff, and you walked right into their ploy. And so many people today act like, well, this would never happen. You know, this Christian nationalism issue is not an issue of people acting like, you know, we're just falling into these dialectical traps. We would never fall for such a thing. You fell for it here. I mean, this thing was like a day away from being taken down in the Iowa state capitol. Literally. Why didn't you just wait one more day and it would be gone? Why would you not take legal measures afterwards and in between to try to work so that this would not happen again? But no. Oh no. We live in crazy land. We live in the time of pure chaos. Instead of doing that, which would be, you know, rational and logical and make sense, no, you got to drive all the way from the South to the Midwest and chop the head of this thing off. And I wonder why. You know, again, you know, it is this issue of the guy's a Christian nationalist. We're going to show this here in a minute. But it's just one of these things where it's like, are you intentionally trying to provoke this? Are you intentionally trying to push this by doing that? But again, I actually think, again, that the old adage that the real action is your reaction, and these people were just walking right into the ploy. So let's keep going here. Jenna goes on to say other things, and I think that she's actually right here. And she says the DC Patriot outlet just proved my point. BLM tried to pass off that BLM is the same as black. Feminists frequently try to pass off that feminist is identical to woman. The DC Patriot just tried it with Christian nationalists representing all Christians. Also note the use of blasphemy here, proving my point. And, here's one of the things that they look at. It is stunning and blasphemous statement. Janice Ellis says that conservative Christian nationalists are now the new Black Lives Matter and Antifa. Yeah, she really said that. Well, what I want you to see here is that there's this whole issue of when we're talking about, oh, I actually didn't pull it up. Here's what she said. There you go. 1, 2, 3. You can read it again. That's what they said. And what you're going to find is that so much of what they're trying to do here is that they're trying to push back on this because, again, we have to see one of the key things that's going about. You've got constitutional liberty at one end, and you've got sort of tyranny and or authoritarianism on the other end. And we've had this conversation so much before that if you go down the progressive left of it, they're moving away from constitutional liberties. Everybody sees that. Everybody understands that. And they've done that through this long march of, various means of using the legal world to achieve it or BLM to achieve it. But the whole point is that the BLM movement is a Marxist movement. It's totalitarian at its core, and as it's engaging and promulgating its views, it's moving further and further away from constitutional liberties. Well, people always say, well, that's just on the progressive left. Could that ever happen? Well, it's happening on the right also. You have some people in this instance here who have a complete disregard for the rule of law and for the Bill of Rights and First Amendment freedoms that are given to us here. And they're labeling themselves as Christian nationalists in order to achieve it. But notice what else that Jenna points out here. If you're a woman that wants to stand up for women's rights, you're a feminist. Or if you, like here, BLM tried to pass off that BLM is just for the blacks. So if you're pro-black, you're BLM. If you're pro-Christian morality, therefore you're a Christian nationalist. I just want you to realize is that they're making that such a common denominator. And it's like, why would they make that such a common denominator? Well, first of all, they want to make it so lowball that they can get anybody that's conservative to be labeled with the phrase Christian nationalist. So every time people think of Christian nationalists, they're going to think January 6th, Iowa State Capitol building, and all the rest. But also it's done in such a way that people will naively associate with it. And in that sense, it's not a question of if something is done against this, but when something is done against this, then you're going to find legislation brought against good conservative figures who got caught up in the moment. That's why it's such a big concern. So my point that I want you to see here is like, don't fall for the ploy of I'm a Christian nationalist, and that's the only way that I can fight these battles is the way that the Christian nationalists say that I can do it. Now, Jenna goes on to say this, and just for the sake of time, we need to just keep going here. She says this. Looking at the issues of religious freedom, this figure, Sam Jones, says, Jenna does not understand the principle of higher laws. Her worldview is broken. And you see so many of these Christian nationalists that do that. And she literally, LOL, I literally defended John MacArthur in court over the issue of higher law and civil disobedience. So she goes on to say the distinction is that the state of California was compelling churches not to meet in direct violation of God's command to Christians. There is no such similar justification here. And that's so much of what the case is that if you look at the issue of, the state of California and COVID and all the rest, they were forcing people not to meet. The government was forcing them to do this. Nobody was forcing any person in the state of Iowa to bow down and worship this monument. Nobody was being forced to do any of that. So Jenna, it's a wrong understanding of what she was doing. She rightly understands and went to court over the issue of there is a higher and lower law. And when there is some kind of discontinuity between them, we need to take legal action here. That's not what's going on here. There was nothing compelled upon the individuals to actually participate in this. That said, in summary, what we're trying to find here is that there's a lot of people trying to deal with the Christian nationalist movement and justifying what's going on here, even though it's to the destruction of property and the issue of removing religious freedom in the lives of people. Step one. Step two. Let's pull this up here. Let's add a little bit more to the story that people have been bringing to the table. And I turn here to none other than Janet Medford. And Janet Medford starts to deal with this, and she says, Christian nationalists rejoice. Michael Cassidy is available as a speaker through Gabe Wrench's Pingo Media, and has a link for you to donate. His attorney, David Younts, also is not a new member of the Moscow-drenched CN lineup. Anyone shocked? So what you find here is you're going to see things where Michael Cassidy, this event occurs, and within really no time at all, there was a way to fight his legal battle with full media understandings and articles written by Christian nationalist outlets with, not just media, but with the photo ops and all of the quotes that were needed for it in a short amount of time. In addition to this, we keep looking at here. This person, David Younts, says former prosecutor, JAG, and #1 ranked senior defense counsel in the Air Force, is one of his legal defenses related to this. But also, you're going to see, that's just your beard got smaller, my friend, or maybe it got larger, who knows. Also participated with Nate Fisher in this regard. And what these figures are is many of them are the Christian nationalists. Now, look at what it also goes on to say here. Potential postscript, quote, and while you're at it, throw Michael some more cash that he has the discretion to redistribute to a nonprofit of his choice that the Give, Send, Go won't name. This is all for the glory of God, of course. And one of the things that you're finding here is that there's so many people that are showing many, many things related to this. Namely, notice this, and again, this is just more that people are talking about. It says, here's info on one of the new founding podcast hosts, founder Santiago Plego, son of New St. Andrews board member Carlos Plego, and Christchurch Women's Bible Study leader Becky Plego, while he was married, and so on and so forth. But you're starting to see different things about issues within their families. You're starting to see the legal defense that's coming about. But notice what else she goes on to say. She says, and director of the venture fund for new founding. I'm just saying what she's reporting here. Are you starting to see a connection here? One of the top Christian nationalist movements is New Founding. Some of the people that participate in it are the legal defense with Cassidy in this regard, who are also part of what was known as like the Moscow crowd, not just the Doug Wilson Moscow crowd, but you also have like the Foundationalist Society and all of the groups that are brought together. So you look at it and it's like, so you have a guy that is an open Christian nationalist that has legal support from the same groups of the Christian nationalists, with funding from the Christian nationalists, with web media attention from the Christian nationalists, and the funding defense from the Christian nationalists. And you wonder, was this planned? And he also drove from Mississippi to the state of Iowa. I think that shows a lot of intent that's going on here. So my point on this is that you're starting to see a significant direction that this is going. You're starting to see not only intent, but you're starting to see the movers and shakers behind this. And I think what we have to find is that as the time rolls out and as the legal charges are brought forth, they're going to look into this kind of stuff. I'm not giving any sway here or there. I'm just saying these are things that we need to rightly consider. Is that, was this planned and premeditated? And I think it points in that direction. But again, the rule of law will show such a thing. But it also goes to show that many of the people that are labeling themselves as Christian nationalists are taking active steps and measures in this regard, in this direction, to do these kinds of things. So if you ask, like, what is Christian nationalism? Well, it's clearly what Jenna was saying is correct. You're seeing the issues of what they're doing to personal liberties, religious liberties, freedom of speech, blasphemy laws. And what does it look like? Like this. And I've raised questions such as this. Would they be doing more of these things if the law and the punishments weren't harsher? I don't know. Maybe they would. Maybe they wouldn't. Is this the start of more of these types of things that we're going to see within our society today? Are we going to see these things done to more, maybe, satanic monuments? And does it stop with satanic monuments? Why would it not be to other religious monuments that they don't find favorable, either in the public sphere or just in public per se at that point? Again, it's one of the things that we as Christians have to realize is that we have the right to defend our views and to stand in the public with our views, but we don't have the right to bring, bodily harm against another individual or the destruction of somebody else's property. And this is so much of what Jenna's trying to bring about here. And again, I talked about this. I said this, and I actually explained this to you earlier about how this idea of Christian nationalism is moving in this dialectical trap for people. But Jenna goes on to say this. In response to this, she says, would you be cool with a Christian beheading a statue of Allah in the Iowa State Capitol, and William Wolf, a self-professed Christian nationalist, says 100% full send. And Jenna's right. She says, there it is. CNs are not actually concerned. Sorry, right here, I'm pulling this up. And she says, would you be cool with a Christian beheading a statue of Allah in the Iowa State Capitol? 100% full send. And she says that there it is. CNs are not actually concerned. Satanism is not a real religion. They want a theocracy and to forcibly compel everyone in America to assent to their version of Christianity. So I want to finish a little bit of this before we transition into sort of a second part here. And I want you to see, like, how does this satanic society actually respond to this? So let's pull up their Facebook page here, and I may have to do just a slight adjustment. Yes, I will. Bear with me. Bear with me here. We're going to pull it up so you can just see some of what they're having to say about it. Here we go. So you can see some of the pictures and whatnot that are on their website. It's actually their Facebook page. Okay, good enough. So one of the things you're going to find here is like they're talking about this and they've got all their different comments and different aspects. You even see a guy that says he's going to go and proclaim the gospel there. Good for you, my friend. Notice he didn't have to go chop down the head of the thing on there. But notice what they're also going to say. They have a GoFundMe. It says here's our GoFundMe for legal fees and to build next year's display. They're coming back. You know, you could have waited a couple of days, but nope, they're now going to come back. Now they're going to have more legal power and more legal precedent to try to come back again. And they've raised money. Looks like not a whole lot of money, but they're raising some cash here. They've had interviews on CNN talking about these matters. They're getting major publicity on this. So it's like your reaction was the action that they were really looking for. Now they've got the opportunity to discuss this in greater detail. You know, they show different displays of it and so forth. Talking about Ron DeSantis. Another thing I want you to pull up here. You know, more of why they're giving this justification. The Satanic Temple of Iowa is proud to participate in the festivities at our capital this holiday season. Our display features the tenets, you know, so on forth. It gives their whole idea. You know, they're thankful and all this. Again, these things, like, I don't want them there. And I just think there are other means of dealing with this than the destruction of property. And they go on and give so much more. So many different things. It could go on and on and on and on. There was another thing that I saw up there that I was looking for, but we won't be able to find it. So we must then turn and change and sort of deal with this in another way, another fashion. And I kind of want to ask this question. How should we as Christians deal with these kinds of things? And several years ago, I was asked to help work on a book. I spent a lot of time working on this book on what's known as the second edition. It's really the third edition, but that's another story for another day. On Christian ethics with my longtime mentor, Dr. Norman Geisler. And one of the chapters that we dealt with in there is on the issue of civil disobedience and how should Christians deal with the issue of civil disobedience, a whole host of other topics. And I kind of want to discuss a few of the things that he lays out in there, but I also want to just apply it to this situation because I think this is an area that a lot of people are going to easily get swept up in, this whole Christian nationalist movement. And I want us to forego some of this, that there are other options for us than lopping the heads off of a monument or the destruction of property and so forth. So here's how I want us to look at this. I'm just going to talk to you about a few of these. And they're really just going to follow some of the things that were laid out in here. This is coming from here. This is many of the thoughts of Dr. Geisler here, but also I helped with this significant revision to all of this. So a lot of his thinking on this matter is also my thinking on this matter. So a lot of it comes from there with extra commentary. So Dr. Geisler was right that there are really three different ways that people will appropriate and start to deal with these kinds of situations. And the first one could be, you know, people will say anarchy. You know, you need to just have a complete disregard for government. Christians shouldn't have any role with government. Government's evil. Government's nasty. Government's horrible. We shouldn't have such a thing. But it's rightly recognized by so many people that that particular approach is just inherently unbiblical and really doesn't even deserve much of a conversation. really it's just the anarchist movement that came through the, the hippie liberals that came about in the 60s, 70s, or whatever in that sense. And that's one thing I've noticed. Liberal can be understood in a variety of different ways, just for saying it. Our off the cuff way of liberal usually is progressive. And a lot of times we use them synonymously, but there's also theological liberal, and theological liberal is not just a progressive, like it has a defined, definition and movement within, theological liberalism in the sense of Schleiermacher and all the rest. So sometimes you can use liberalism and progressivism, interchangeably, but rightly understood, there's a difference between classical liberalism and progressivism. Now, the other one would be something like this, the radical patriotism, where civil disobedience is never appropriate. That you as a Christian, you should realize that God gave you the government, that God says you should always follow the government, and God expects us to always obey every form of government, even evil governments. And you'll hear people talk about this. And a lot of times the Christian nationalists will be like, this is what the pietists are there, but these figures who just say, regardless of what goes on, you need to just submit to the government and so forth. And, pietism it's almost just like, there's a few what I call smear words that they might use, almost bourgeois words. You're a boomer con, or you're a pietist in this. A lot of times they're used as just false labels to put on people, but this is a position that people have. It's known as the radical patriotism view. And what we have to find here is that one of the issues with this is that, yes, God does ordain all governments. God is sovereign. There is no maverick molecules in this entire universe. Just as much as God raised up and allowed, the founding of the United States of America, he raised up and allowed every evil government on the face of this planet. But just because God ordains all government doesn't mean that God ordains all of the evils of every single government. And it is true that God commands obedience under the government, but it's never absolute and unqualified. In fact, we are not commanded to obey evil governments in this regard. So if you think about things like the issue of, the apostles in the book of Acts being asked to go and stop preaching the gospel. And they said it is better for us to obey God rather than man. Namely, you are an evil government. We're not going to be compelled to do exactly what you've told us to do. Or the Hebrew midwives when they were told to kill their children, and they said, nope, we're not doing it. Or Daniel when they were compelled and told you can't worship and you must bow down to the idol in that regard. And what you find here is that there's this key distinction that we have to find is that, anarchy just says don't believe any government. Radical patriotism, or you could just call it like radical obedience in this sense, whatever it wants to be, that they're using here is that you should always follow government. But we find so many counterexamples in the text of scripture. And this is why this is such a difficult topic for so many people, where we find this idea that, yes, you should be obeying the government, but yet there are these times where Christians or the people of God do not obey their government. So which one is it? How do we put them together? And I think that's where Dr. Geisler provides a very wise understanding of this. And he says that there's this third view that could be known as biblical submission. And he says, here's some of the differences between the two views. And this is some notes on this. He said, we should disobey if the government promotes an unbiblical view, or should we disobey when it commands us to obey an unbiblical view? So think about the difference here. Should we disobey if they're just promoting something? Well, in one sense, yes. Like we should not obey if they're trying to force us to teach 6th grade children all this sex ed stuff, or we shouldn't go and, promote all of the different things that this secular government is calling us, whether it be LGBTQ, the sexual rights issues, vain morality issues, vain religious understanding issues, and so forth. But he makes this distinction between the government just merely promoting it and allowing it to take place versus the government not only just allowing it, promoting it, but commanding it to take place. And what he realizes is that both views, both the compelled and the promote view, recognize the power of the government is always subordinate to the power of God. Both views realize that there is a higher law and there is a lower law. And nobody's debating whether or not there are those two different distinctions there, the distinction between the two different positions. They also recognize that there's a moral law above every human government law. So whatever it may be that the government passes, we realize that there is a moral law that's foundational not only to Western society, but it's actually anchored in God himself. And that it's actually the law that's written on the conscience of every individual. In addition, we find that any government that rules against God's law is a tyrannical government, and it is the responsibility of citizens to resist evil governments, either through protest, and sometimes it could be even through force in some regard. And we're going to talk about that later, because I think there's going to be a distinction that we need to see there. And in fact, I'm just going to say this now. This whole Cassidy situation did not rise to a level of force by any stretch of the imagination, by any classic biblical ethics text. And they're going to go, oh, 20th century. Okay, whatever, guys. The 20th century is dealing with 20th century issues in 20th century texts, and your books are all 20th century books. So don't give me that kind of argument in that sense. So another issue that you're going to find is that when you're looking at this anti-compulsion view, this view recognizes that there is a difference between a government that allows for unbiblical teachings versus one that compels an unbiblical view. So according to this view, for example, a Christian could peacefully protest against abortion. And people do this all the time. You can go down to the abortion clinic. You can preach against it. You can hand out tracts against it. You can deal with things that are opposing this whole issue of abortion. You can take legal measures. You can take practical measures, all the rest. This view says you can take every legal action against fighting abortion in all legal means. However, and this is the key point, it would be wrong and inappropriate to go and bomb an abortion clinic just to get it to stop. In short, civil disobedience is permitted when they compel you or force you to do the evil thing. But even then, so that means you shouldn't do it. So if the government was forcing you to want to go and get an abortion, you should rightfully not do that. You should rightfully not fall prey for that type of manipulation. But it's never right to go down and bomb the abortion clinic, or it's never right to go down and bomb your opponents or destroy their buildings. Or in this sense, nowhere did the state of Iowa compel its citizens or the citizens of this country to go and worship this monument. You can refrain from it. You can take every legal measure to try to get rid of it. You can try to get it put in an area that maybe people don't see. All the rest, you can take all of those steps. And you go, well, I don't know if we can because the left's going to stop us. The left does that to you all the time. What's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. You have legal means of taking care of this. So again, you have the ability to fight back against this, but they weren't compelling you to do this. And it never, ever rose to the point of having some kind of physical altercation in this regard. And we find people using this type of distinction all the time, where somebody's not only just permitting it, but compelling it. Christians don't participate. And you can think of the refusal to kill the innocent babies in Exodus, or the refusal of Pharaoh, where they said, no, Pharaoh, we're not going to listen to you when you say we can't worship our God, or the refusal to worship the idol in Daniel. Notice this. Daniel didn't go out and destroy the idol. He didn't lop the head off of the idol. What did he do? He refused to participate in it. Also, we find that he refused to stop praying in the book of Daniel, and the apostles refused to stop proclaiming the gospel. Note this, none of the midwives violently revolted. Israel did not violently revolt against Egypt. Daniel just refused the orders of the king and accepted the punishment in the lion's den. The apostles refused to stop preaching, and yet they also accepted the legal consequences. In short, none of them took the law in their own hands, since the authorities that exist have been ordained by God. And some of the people say, well, that's where the rubber meets the road here, is that this is how we need to do. They're forcing this on us, and they want to take the law into their own hands. And that's precisely what so much of this Christian nationalist movement is doing. That's what the blasphemy laws are going to be, is remember, you can either change a law, change the meaning of the law, or change the whole government and put yourself in, and then write the laws that you want. Again, like we have a democratic process now, but that's not what they want. They want much more than that, in which at this point in time, they want to take the law into their own hands. But if they get put into place, they want to, in quote, they want to punish, imprison, or put to death atheists or false religions or people that are promoting such things in society. And they'll have the prudence, and, you know, the Christian Prince is going to give you the discernment on when you should and could do such things. But notice what Geisler says in this regard, is that if we're going to take this approach, Geisler said the same logic could lead Christians to hinder people from going into Hindu, Buddhist, or Mormon temples so as to prevent them from committing idolatry. So, Christian nationalists or people that are promoting this view, why are you not doing that? Also, it could also lead us to snatch alcohol and cigarettes out of unbelievers' hands so as to help prevent their and others' deaths. Likewise, it would justify evil disobedience to hinder a state-executed capital punishment simply because we believe the person to be innocent. But this is to presume that one's personal belief can override the God-ordained government process of civil disobedience. The point is that why are you not going out and stealing all of the pills for the morning after pill for abortion that's coming about? According to your logic, if you lop the head off of this one, you should lop the head, or namely take all of the abortion pills out of this place. Why are you not doing that? It would be consistent. It would be purely consistent to do all of these kinds of things. But again, we recognize you're not being compelled to take those pills. Should we fight them? Should we bring legislation against them? Yes. And the whole overturning of Roe v. Wade shows the long march of how it can be done. Now, I recognize all of the evil pitfalls of the pro-life community. I recognize all of the inconsistencies against it, but we live in a nation of laws and we have to work within that sort of confines of what we have here. But in addition to this, what we have to see here is that why did they do it here? Why now? Why this? Well, I think they were set up. This was clearly used to provoke them, and the real action was your reaction. So you have some people that just played right into the hands of this, but then there's also the other side of the story. The other side of the issue is that these people are meaningfully trying to do these things. Like, they want to force these types of legislation. They want to forcibly bring these things into society. And that's what the Christian nationalist position is. So in short, Cassidy took the law into his own hands. And even though we have several issues in our country concerning the rule of law, and secularism has overtaken many aspects of society, we still have a court and legal system to handle these types of situations. And that's what I think you should do. So one, don't fall for the psyop of Christian nationalism as the only way to fight these battles. See what they're doing, understand what's going on with it, realize that it is an intentional way to bring integralism into this idea of the Protestant magisterial reformation. It's Hegelian totalitarianism. I know these are all big words that people sometimes don't always use, but this is what it's been. We've shown it in other venues with it. But ultimately, it comes down to this. Jenna is right on this, and Charlie Kirk is wrong. Charlie Kirk is wrong if he thinks that we can use our Christian faith to destroy somebody's property and take away their religious freedom. Jenna is right in that the First Amendment gives religious freedom, and that it is always wrong at all times and all places in this regard to destroy somebody else's property in order to enact our religious convictions upon another person. You are not being compelled to do this. You are not being told to worship this. You are not being told that that your family had to worship this, or that your whole state had to worship this. Again, this is an issue of the real action is the reaction here. And these people fell into this. So I want you to think about this. Think about the organized things that came about in order for this event to occur. See what's going on here. Don't fall for it. Don't just fall for the emotional ploys about it. See what's going on. Keep thinking. Think for yourself. And again, that's why we're here. That's why we make these kind of videos, so that we don't fall prey to this kind of stuff. Realize the rhetoric around it. The rhetoric is strong, and many people are going to fall for it, but you don't have to fall for it. So again, like, share, distribute this video as you wish. Thank you.
10,000 years will give you such a crick in the neck.